All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining us for Job Search Triage. Is your job search hemorrhaging time, energy, and resources? Right now, given the current state of your job search, where do you need to focus to have the biggest impact and benefit in terms of landing? Today, we're going to learn a simple process to make more effective use of your time, your energy, and your resources during the job search. We're going to zero in on what's working and what's not. And this is all led by Tom McDonough, who's the Director of Programs and founding board member for the Institute of Career Transitions, a career and life coach. Tom has been part of ICT coaching team since its inception. Though his career story has allowed him to experience many roles, the underlying theme is helping people clarify and align personal and career goals with their core values, their unique organizing principle through body, mind, and spirit integration. And I again want to thank the Friends of the Tewksbury Library who sponsor almost all of our programs here at the library, including some of these Monday ones. So now almost 40 of us or so who are watching. Let's give a big virtual round of applause to Tom for joining us here today. And Tom, you can take it away. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Robert. And welcome, everyone. I'm happy to be here. And I know your circumstances might not be that happy and cheerful, but hopefully our time together will be. I'd like to share my screen. And as Robert mentioned, I'm with the Institute of Career Transition. We were formed in 2013 in the wake of the Great Recession. And our founder, Ofer Sharon, was at MIT, a professor and a researcher, and he was examining job search and its impact on the job seeker. And I'd like to be sharing as we go through some of those insights. And right off the back, I want to encourage everyone to get something to write with, to take notes with. This can be really helpful. One, if I say something and you want to circle back to it, just make a quick note. Periodically, as we move through this afternoon, I'll be asking you to reflect and jot down a few thoughts, which you may or may not share in chat, but it's good to just have a place where you can look back at what you jotted down for follow-up reflection. So this afternoon, we're focusing on triage, and at least in the medical sense, I think we're all familiar with. It's a way of quickly sorting people and tasks to allocate limited resources. And really, this is based on a sense of urgency. And you really want to get a sense of what can you do that's going to have the most benefit for people. And so the key things are limited resources and to really try to deal with the most urgent things first. Getting a sense of when you're in a job search, you actually do have limited resources. And that so often a job search can turn into a 24/7 pursuit. Some of you may have gotten yourself caught in that trap where you feel guilty if you're not working constantly on your job search, even though it's wearing you down, you're getting really stressed. So that the first thing, the most urgent thing, is often just to stop the hemorrhaging. And so if you're finding yourself in that position, that hopefully I'll give you a few tips as we move through this afternoon to one, spot what might be getting in the way, might be putting you off your game so that you can be fully present in your job search and show up at your best. For most of us in a job search, ideally, we'd like to land meaningful work that generates a sustainable livelihood. And I think that's our common goal, and yet it's going to look a little different for each of us. And not only that, depending on how long you've actually been in your job search, that you might be just looking for just something temporary to kind of stop the hemorrhaging so that you don't end up living in your car. so that some people are actually finding themselves in that position. And so be aware that that might be your short-term goal, but we also want to stay connected with ideally what we want to achieve. And so when you think of your goal, the work you want to be doing, that you want to land, that's going to generate for you a meaningful income, what does that look like for you? Just take a moment and jot down on a piece of paper just maybe one or two thoughts that really reflect what you're looking for. It might be a role, it might be a type of work. So just take a moment and write that down, just so that we can return back to it. Now, ideally, what do you want to be doing? This might be slightly different from what you just wrote down, but ideally, and maybe in
so you
6
can
months,
hear
a
me.
year, 2 years, what do you want to be doing? What do you want your life to look like? So what do you want to be doing?
Okay.
Who do you want to be doing it for? Now, that might be like an ideal company or an ideal group of companies that you really want to be in that industry and you want to be doing what you enjoy doing, and you want to be doing it for a company like X. Who do you want to be doing it with? And the reason I ask this question is that in talking with a lot of professionals, as they look back over their career and look at the roles and the jobs and the organizations where they really felt they were at their best, for many, it really was being part of a team of competent, skilled professionals, and they really got a lot of work done that they were proud of. And so for some of you, that it's not only the type of work and the type of people you want to do it for, but you're also really looking for an environment where team, and really a skilled team, is what you're looking for. For others, it might be just like you really want to be that individual contributor. But like, what is that? And then why? Why does this ideal work, ideal kind of situation, why does that appeal to you? Like, what is it in what you've written that really attracts you? Now, stepping back and just looking at your job search to date, and some of you may be new to job search, for others it might be several months or even longer. So right now, what does your job search feel like for you? Come up with a metaphor, maybe even a cartoon. And it might be kind of silly, but it also might be like, it really drives things home, like an anvil falling on you, carpet pulled out from underneath you, a black hole. Or it could be something periodically that's really positive, that some of the people you're connecting with, some of the relationships. But on a feeling level, what does job search feel like for you right now? For many of you, you may realize that job search is stressful. It can be really stressful. And this is something that we often overlook, the stress that's involved in job search, that there's a frustration in terms of when we do things and we don't get any response, that it can be really confusing, that we can be getting a lot of contradictory information, a lot of contradictory best practices, that we can start to feel isolated and alone. That's really fertile ground for a lot of negative self-talk to start filling our minds. It's important to realize you're not alone. Just look at the number of people that are here this afternoon and that you've met along your job search journey, that you're not alone. And stress takes its toll. And this is something that we can't overemphasize. Stress makes us stupid, really. It makes our work less effective, that we're not showing up at our best. And so when we speak of triage and hemorrhaging, the first thing that really we have to deal with is the impact of the job search stress itself on us. And that may be that we need to kind of pause and take a break, and then we get the guilt of pausing and taking a break. But we have to break that pattern of stress so that we can be much more proactive and much more effective in our job search. And so job search is a time to double down on self-care. And I'm sure many of you have fallen into that 24/7 trap. You just feel so guilty when you're not constantly working on your job search, even though that work may be less and less effective over time because of the stress. And so if that's what you can start to identify that, like really the stress is getting to you, then the first thing up is to pause and to reboot. And I don't know about your computer, but my computer, after a while, I just have to stop and reboot. And then all of a sudden, everything starts working much better. And periodically in my day, I need to go out for a walk. For others, you get that naturally built in, taking your dog out for a walk. But that we need these breaks, because it is during these breaks, and especially during the nighttime and overnight and getting that good night's sleep, that our brain is actually putting a lot of pieces together. And that's when we come up with insights. It's when we give our brain actually a break. And so to be most effective, that we need recovery time. Now, you might recognize this caricature of Albert Einstein, and he often tells us that if we're constantly doing the same thing and not getting the results we want, that we keep expecting to get different results from the same behavior, like that might be time to, if you can spot that, to say, wait a minute, I need to step back. And very often we need to take our level of thinking to another level. And that often means talking to people. Well, I'm talking to people about the stress, talking to people about what we're doing and how might, what are we seeing? How might we be more effective in our job search? As I mentioned, ICT was formed in 2013. Our founder is Ofer Sharon, then a professor at MIT, and a research into job searching and unemployment. And what he realized is that people seem to fall into two camps. Some people kind of over time really felt that there must be something wrong with them, that negative self-talk. Other people recognized really early on that the system itself was flawed. Thus the title of his book, Flawed System, Flawed Self. And so as we begin to kind of deal with the stress of job search, and very often the fact that we're doing a lot of things and maybe not getting quality feedback, that we don't know what else to do, what else to change in the process, just to be able to recognize it's not you, that the system itself is flawed, that can really help you reframe the process and not to be able to take things personal and all of that negative thinking, and all of a sudden begin to step back, get some perspective, and realize, okay, this system is flawed. That very often we might think that the system with Indeed, with all of these job boards, and I can find all these jobs, the system is really set up for me, so why isn't it working? Well, all those things aren't set up for you. They're all set up for the recruiter and the hiring manager so that they get a really select set of people to look at. And so the more people that are applying, the more people that don't even make it to the surface to get someone's eyeballs on it. That you may have heard that hiring managers spend 7 seconds, 10 seconds on a resume. That's if they even see it. And so just getting a sense of the system itself and what your strategy is. Now, you may be aware of Steve Martin, the comedian, and his strategy, and it was a long road, but his strategy he summed up in the simple phrase, be so good they can't ignore you. Now for us, depending on the type of work we do, we might not see how that applies. But actually, the only real job security is that we're finding work we love that other people need, and they know that we can do the job. And so Steve Martin, again and again, showing up to the comedy clubs, bombing again and again and again. But there was a sense of a skill that he was trying to develop, and he was actually getting some feedback he could use. And there are a lot of people that actually do have a craftsman's mindset, that you actually have a skill and that you're trying to get better at it, and you're trying to find other ways to enhance and improve those skills. So in those cases, you're actually in a really good position. And I'll just throw out just the idea of a program, that if you're really a programmer at the top of your game, that other people already know who you are. And if you're slowly moving up that ladder, developing those skills, there are people that are starting to recognize that. And so the job search process becomes much easier if we fall into that boat. Whereas to the extent that we can do everything and we really don't have a sense of other people knowing what we can do, then it becomes much more difficult. And we begin to see how actually the system is flawed. And the easier it is to find a job posting, the easier it is for everyone else to find a job posting. And therefore, the sense of moving people down the list and only a few actually pop up to the surface. So just recognizing right off the bat, the system is flawed, it's not you, you're not alone, and it really is important to start connecting with other people so that are in the same boat. Another important thing to be recognizing is that there's no magic bullet. That very often, I think, when we're getting desperate, when we're confused, there's that sense of being very gullible for get-rich-quick schemes. And the same applies to the job search. You know, this is the magic technique. If you do this, that you'll land relatively quickly. Well, there is no magic bullet. And just recognizing that. The system is flawed, there's no magic bullet, but there are actually things we can do to increase the odds, but it might actually take quite a while. That just recently, a colleague landed his ideal job. That is awesome news, great news. But his story isn't so awesome. That basically, he's been 2 or 3 years in that pursuit of that job, periodically taking, short-term gigs to survive. But it took that long, but then eventually, because of the groundwork he was laying, the relationships he was developing, he did eventually land that ideal job. But again, it wasn't a magic bullet, but it clearly was things that he was doing that over time created a body of work. People began to get a sense of who he was and what he could do, and the right connections were made. So the question then is, if the system is flawed, how do you navigate this flawed system? And once you can reframe it that way, a lot of the stress can go away, which doesn't mean it's not stressful. It just means that it's much more manageable when you see it's the system and you're trying to navigate a flawed system and you're looking for cues. And oftentimes the best way to find those cues is to be keeping a journal yourself in terms of what you're actually doing, but then talking to people. And that so often we hear that the secret weapon to job search is networking. And I'm sure a lot of you cringe when you hear the word networking, because very often when we hear the word networking, we're thinking of going to networking meetings. And that's not what networking is really all about. Yet, yes, networking meetings can play a really small part, but it's actually in those one-to-one conversations. And those one-to-one conversations become much easier if you actually think of networking as pretty much what you do without a second thought when you have a new hobby. If it's a new hobby, there's no real need to perform. There's no sense of deadlines. It's just you're curious, you're interested. And so what are you doing? You're reading up on it. You're maybe going to some meetings where other people with the same interests are gathering, that you have a common interest, that you're there out of curiosity and wanting to learn. And that kind of networking, for most of us, we don't even consider networking. It's just kind of like part of being human and pursuing an interest. But all of a sudden, when we reframe it as part of a job search, all of a sudden, all that negative framing tends to pile in. So again, if you can change the mindset, change the framing. And so when you hear the word networking, it's actually starting to talk to other people who are in the same industry, in the same field that you're in, and you're looking for those common interests and starting to set up those common relationships. Now, you might be familiar with the story of the elephant. And in that story, that you have a bunch of blind people who have never even heard of an elephant before. And they're exposed to an elephant, and they come onto the elephant in different places. And everyone begins to think that they're dealing with something totally different, that they might see the ear as a fan, they might see the tusk as a sphere, they might see the leg as a tree, etc. So if you can look at job search as the, if you will, the elephant, and the larger elephant is the economic environment that we're living in right now. And the economic environment has ups and downs. After 2013, the economy was really decimated, and long-term unemployment reached its height. After COVID, you had a totally different scenario. It wasn't an economic collapse because of economics, but rather because of COVID. And so everything was shut down, but as soon as the panic was over, things began to open up really quickly. So there was a totally different experience of people if they were long-term unemployed after the Great Recession versus if they would fall into a long-term unemployment after COVID. But that's also starting to shift now. And again, that we're seeing more and more people starting to fall into long-term unemployment. And at least in terms of the statistics, consistently, half of the long-term unemployed are older workers. That's just the statistic. Like, what's an older worker? Well, some people see it as 45 and up. Others see it as 50 and up. But again, that if you look at the long-term unemployed, that usually at least half of them fall into the category of being older workers. Just recognizing that can help you reframe how you go about your job search. And so if you have a sense of, like, right now, getting a feel for, like, what's the economy doing? What's the situation? But then whether you're on the leg or the tusk or the tail, like, what's the sector that you want to be playing in? What's happening there? Like, what are the rules of the game? What's the playing field? So if you're in tech and a skilled programmer, it's going to be a totally different process that if you're in marketing or something else, and there are tons of people in marketing that are looking for a job. Or right now it might be social media. Then at a time there was a lot of demand for social media, and then all of a sudden there's a glut. I remember back in the 90s, there was a real demand for PTs, and everyone, like saw that as a great job opportunity. And then all of a sudden there was a glut. And what did they do? Oh, PTs need masters now, or they need doctorates. That it's like constantly trying to kind of narrow the field so that the hiring manager has a smaller select set to deal with it. So part of doing your triage is knowing what's going on in the larger economy, what are the trends, but also in your specific domain, what are the trends? Like, who are the key players? And when I say key players, I'm also talking locally. Like, who are the key players in that field that you might be able to have a quick talk with, a quick chat on the internet, or a quick call, a quick Zoom meeting? Can you track them down on LinkedIn? And having these one-on-one conversations is a much better way of going about networking than going to larger networking meetings. So once you can focus, once you can kind of like have a break, start to relook at your job search, that you want to get a sense of getting oriented. And for orienting, you want to get a sense of like, what's your current condition? Like, what's your runway? How urgent is landing? How did you get here? So it makes a difference if, hopefully in your mindset, it makes a difference if like a whole part of your company was laid off, or if your company actually closed, versus a one-on-one where you're being let go, that if it's the whole branch, that you kind of get a sense, oh, it's easy to see it's the system. But if it's more just you're being let go, it's much harder to kind of see that it's still a systemic problem, an issue with the system, and not to take it personally, but to just get a sense as you're oriented, like, how did you get here? That for a lot of people, especially introverts, that you just love to keep your head down and do your work. And you haven't really developed the relationships and the network that's going to help you during those times of unemployment. Now, what we know about the larger environment is that job transitions are happening more and more frequently. And in a sense, that if you're being proactive and making those job searches, those job changes rather, while you're working, that's actually a positive strategy to be using, whether it's a change within your own company or organization or to a different one. It's being proactive in managing your transitions every 4, 5, 6, 7 years, so that in those cases that you have a sense of you're being in control, you're looking for opportunity, and you're actually making your own job security by finding those positions. If, on the other hand, you're just pretty much keeping your head down, doing excellent work, then all of a sudden it can be a real blow, like the rug's been pulled out from under you, and it can take a while to get your bearings. And so orienting is just a way of kind of getting your bearings back again. Reconnecting with what's important to you to get a clear sense of where you're going. Now, Cal Newport does a lot with job search, with career development. And what he likes to see is a lifestyle-oriented job search, in the sense of like, what do you want your life to be like in 5 years and 10 years? And then working back from that to get a sense of like, what's the lifestyle? What are the larger goals you're looking for? And then how do you move backwards and then construct a plan to start moving in that direction? And yes, a lot of things can change, but it can really be helpful to have a general direction of what you're working for and towards. It's much easier to see the next step. And then what's your strategy for getting there? Now, when I say strategy, the tendency is to look for someone else's strategy. And it can be helpful to see how other people got to where they did. And a great part of networking, if you're talking to someone who's doing the kind of work you want to be doing, instead of asking them, well, do you have any tips for me, any suggestions? A much better question is, how did you get here? How do you want their story, you want their path. And that will give you a much better sense of how they probably tailored their search. And very often the landing of that job came out of the blue. That while they were looking for something, something else appeared and it really clicked. And so the strategy should be one that builds on your strengths. So once you're clear on your goal and what you want, begin to get a sense of how are other people getting there, like what's their strategy, but then what's your strategy? How can you adapt your strengths to work toward the same goal? And it might look totally different from what someone else did, but because it's building on your strengths, it's a much larger probability of success. That so often we know what to do, but we're just not doing it. And the reason we're not doing it might be fear. It might be that we don't know how, we don't know the next step. But very often it's because that's not us. That's not how we work. And so being able to spot that and reframe it can really help us begin to have a goal, to have a path. Know it's going to change, but then a strategy that plays to your strengths. Now, I like to refer this as wayfinding, and it's basically talking to people, just like that sense of the hobby, that you're trying to talk to other people who have an interest in the same hobby, the same kind of work, and that you're trying to get a sense of, what's the playing field like? What are the trends? And that's how you begin to put the puzzle together. And if you're curious and the curiosity is driving you, it's much easier to have those conversations, whether you're an introvert or not, because they're your questions. They're questions that the other person is also engaged with. And so the information you're getting back, the feedback you're getting back is much more relevant. Now, in our founder, Ilfra Sharon's second book, The Stigma Trap, and again, with ICT, we deal with experienced professionals. They're usually older professionals. Very often they are in long-term unemployment. And the reality is there is a stigma attached to being unemployed. Whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, there is a stigma attached to being unemployed for a lot of people. So not only is it really stressful, but as you begin to fall into a longer and longer gap, that you'll probably realize that not even the people closest to you can understand, that they just can't get why it's taking so long. And this is why it is helpful to find other people in a similar situation, not so you can whine together, but so that you can realize that you're not alone. And that you can begin to get a sense of what they've tried, what they're seeing, and that can give you more information regarding the playing field. The stigma is again going to fit into that negative mindset. And so it's important to deal with the stress in general, but also that self-doubt and the stigma that keeps bouncing back on us. So that as other people can't understand and they're scratching their head and they're wondering, why is it taking so long? All of a sudden, that's starting to seep into us, and it's making our job search much more difficult. And the more you can spot that early, that you can begin to turn it around. And the first way to turn it around is just having that sense that you're not alone. There are other people in the same situation. The system is broken, but then what's your proactive strategy in your little niche, in the area that you're trying to work in, to begin to slowly but surely become more visible so that you can be found? One simple example that Ophir shares is that as he talks with recruiters, like there's a lot of recruiters that like recognize that, well, yeah, there is, stigma, there is bias against older workers, and they may look at you individually and have some empathy and some sense that, yeah, you can do this work. But are they going to recommend you to the hiring manager? And very often they'll be hesitant because they don't want to have to defend why they're recommending someone that's been out of work for an extended period versus someone who's still doing this work now and can just quickly transition. That it's like if you're in a position where you're hiring consultants to come in. If you bring in a top consulting firm and they screw it up, you're not going to blame you. Your company isn't going to blame you. It's the company. If, on the other hand, you brought in this unknown consulting company and they screwed up, it's much more likely they're going to blame you for picking them as opposed to going with someone who had a proven track record. And so very often, in terms of the stigma, that we can find ourselves in a situation where even the people who kind of sense that, yes, that this person can do the work and they'll really be great at it, but I have these other two people that are actually doing the work now, and I think I'm going to make my life easier by putting them forward to the hiring manager versus someone else. So like there's a lot of just humanness and human bias and human really trying to do what's best for themselves in the process that keeps the broken process going. One of the things that I find really helpful for changing our mindset and staying on top of where our job search is that of keeping a journal. Think back to the age of exploration. Explorers always kept journals. One, so they had a sense of where they were if they were making progress, but also so that they could share that path with other people. They could look back on it. They could learn from it. If you're an exercise buff, that you're keeping track of your workouts if you're trying to improve. Like if you're just going to relax and to have fun, why keep track? But if you actually have a goal for your fitness and you're trying to improve, that you are keeping a journal. You're tracking your progress. And when you're tracking progress, you can see all of a sudden, wait a minute, I'm not getting stronger or I'm not getting faster. Okay, I need to switch up my routine. I need to allow for more recovery time. Oh, wait a minute, I'm actually getting worse. That like I'm too tired to do this now, or I'm too weak. Again, not enough recovery time. So when we think of job search, stress, doubling down on self-care, that keeping a journal can give you a sense of when you're overtraining, when you're doing too much, but also when you're not getting the results you want. Okay? That you actually do need to create a job search plan. And I recommend having a sense of a quarterly plan, like with a real sense of goals in terms of what you want to be doing, and then break that down to weekly goals. But a goal isn't, I want to land. Like a goal is, like, I want to have 3 conversations this week with people in my field. That I want to find 2 ideal openings, and I want to post, I want to apply for them. So that this is like, these are things that are in your control. And so when you're setting up your plan, that it really needs to be about you and what you can control and not what's up to other people. And we need those wins. And so when we set a goal that I'm going to talk to so-and-so today, and we actually do it, take the time to celebrate the win. That we need those little dopamine hits in our brain so that our brain is functioning properly. That celebrating wins is key. So it's not just recognizing it, but how can I celebrate that? And how can I have a sense of gratitude? So if I'm keeping track, and on the weekend, if I look back at the past week and I have a sense of achieved 2 of my 3 goals, so maybe I achieved all 3, that to have a sense of being grateful. And because you're doing something proactive, it's also building up that sense of self-efficacy that's going to help you deal with the stress and that negative talk that so easily can slip back into the job search. Keeping a journal can also spot what's working. Like, what activities are you doing that seem to give you the most bang for your buck? And then what activities just are driving you into the ground, they're not effective, and you just got to stop them. And by keeping a journal and reflecting back on it, that you can spot the things that you want to do more of or improve the way you're doing, and activities that you really need to cut back on or stop because of the toll they're taking. And that's the key part. So it's not just enough to be tracking things, but we need to reflect on them. We need to find things to celebrate, and we need to adapt. That based on the feedback we're getting, we need to adapt our process. Now, in a job search, admittedly, getting quality feedback can be really difficult. And the only way to improve is feedback. And so at least by setting up short-term goals that are in your control, that you can actually check off, that's giving you some feedback that's positive in maybe a whole landscape of a week or 2 where there have been no positive blips at all. Another activity that you can do is to keep an activity log. And this can be surprising, and I don't recommend constant, but just take a 2-week period and write down, keep track of pretty much everything you're doing, how you're spending your time. And you might see that you're spending like way too much time in your job search. You might also find that you're not doing anything, or that you've been working on redoing your resume for 3 weeks without submitting anything. That by keeping an activity log, you can really begin to, as you step back, get an appreciation for what you're actually doing. It'll also allow you to notice your energy level in terms of what you're doing and your quality of engagement. And that can really be a compass where you're kind of following your energy, you're following your level of engagement, and you're taking step after step after step. So how engaged are you? How energized are you? Or the opposite, how drained? And then when are you at your best? To be able to spot, like in the past, when have you been at your best? When are you at your best now? What's your recipe? How can you get more of that in your week so that you're at your best in your job search, so that you show up at your best in your job search? And then also you want to flag like when you're at your worst. Like, and you want to be able to, like, how can you get less of that in your life? And then remember, celebrate wins. Now, I want, as I wrap up, I just want to give you a sense of like, how can you look at your job search in a linear fashion to get a sense of where to focus. And by that, I mean that are you getting offers? And you've only been getting offers. Well, like you might actually be getting offers and they're there for the wrong thing. And you're turning them down. Or maybe at the beginning of your job search, you got a few offers, but they weren't for what you were really looking for. And so you turn them down and you're kicking yourself now, like, because I turned them down. But if you're getting offers that if they're for the wrong things, is there something in the way you're positioning yourself? Like you're doing most things well. People are finding you, you're getting interviews, you're getting offers, but they're not for the right thing. So how can you tweak that just a bit so that you are more likely to be in the right playing field? Also, in terms of interviews, if you're getting interviews, celebrate that, whether you're landing or not. If you're getting interviews, like you're making it up to the top, people are seeing you. Celebrate that and realize that like not everyone is going to get the gold. And even in the past, not everyone, even if it was down to 3 or 4 candidates, the fact that you made it there, like that's key. And there can be things beyond your control in the sense that they may be internal candidates, or it may be that the other person that got there, they graduated from the same school, or they have something else in common. That there are biases all over the place, and it's not just objectively that they were the best, but it just means that in that situation. And so what might need to be focusing on is everything else is working. I'm getting interviews, but I'm not closing. So how can I work on that final closing activity so that I'm actually coming across as the person that would be best suited for where the company wants to go? And it might be that you need to be asking better questions in the interview. Like it could be as simple as that. Or it could be that there's such neediness because of an extended job search that's raising an unconscious red flag in the interview. So that there are a lot of things we can't control. But I remember way back at the beginning of ICT when we would have these large meetings and people, would just be so frustrated that they weren't landing. But in the way they talked, you could see the frustration. They couldn't see it. They couldn't see the anger, but everyone else in the room could. And that some people call that leaking, that we're just so hurt and wounded that in our conversations, we're really leaking that neediness, and that creates a red flag. So there are a lot of things that we could look for that might just up our game, but very often it can come back to just being at our best, which means self-care. And then on the other hand, that if we're not getting any interviews at all, it might be time to reevaluate your strategy. Because I said that just doing a lot of, okay, I found these postings and I'm applying, that if it's just your paperwork and there's no other connection with you, unless you have exactly what they're looking for, the odds are low. Not zero, but the odds are low unless you have exactly what they're looking for. And so the more you can find a way to network into that company or that organization, to just know people, the more likely you are actually to make it through, even and talk to people before they even see your paperwork. So again, I'm bumping up on the hour and I want to leave time for questions. So I'll just end things there with just the reminder that have clear goals, recognize that the system is broken, and have a real sense of a plan, a strategy that works best with your strengths to go about your job search. System is broken, it's stressful, take care of yourself. So with that, I will open things up.
So folks, let's give Tom a big virtual round of applause for a great presentation, and we'll take approximately 10 minutes of audience questions. And I think I will stop stop the recording